Welcome to the XY Advisor Podcast, a global community of financial advisors sharing and learning with one another to drive the positive evolution of financial advice. To get involved, go to xyadvisor.com or simply download the XY Advisor app. This podcast series is brought to you by Morningstar, offering you technology and services to support your end-to-end financial advice process, including product research, investment data, and comprehensive financial planning technology through Advisor Logic. Advisor Logic offers you simple yet powerful tools to run your business, deliver holistic advice, and build trust with clients. You can experience an industry-leading digital advice offering. Simply select pre-built strategies, compare products, and generate your advice documents within a single guided workflow. Hello and welcome back to the XY Advisor Podcast. I'm Fraser Jack, and today we are kicking off a series brought to you by Morningstar about all things efficiency and probably technology efficiency to being the focus here. It's a 5-part series. We have got an amazing panel of speakers, and in each episode we're going to cover a different topic. The first topic today, in this episode, we're really covering off on the idea of how do you make technology decisions? What goes into a decision? What's the internal emotional decision-making process? What's the logical decision-making process? And how can advisors go about that process of making technology decisions? In the next episode, episode 2, we're really going to cover off on the concept around, expectations versus reality. What expectations do we have when it comes to using software, and how does that play out when we implement it in our business? In the third episode, we're going to cover off on integrations and really having a look under the hood around things like APIs and working out how we can stack our software together to make it work efficiently. The fourth episode, we're really going to cover off on compliance and how compliance has an overlay, how we can make compliance more efficient, and all the different things using technology that are both in place now and coming when it comes to compliance. And in the last episode, episode 5, we're going to cover off on the change management process. Obviously, every time there is a change happening, every time we implement a software for efficiency reasons, there is a fair amount of change and training and tracking and all those things that go with it. So those are the 5 topics we're going to cover, and we look forward to bringing each topic to you. Our amazing panel of speakers for this series is Principal Financial Advisor Phil Thompson from Skye Wealth, Principal Financial Advisor Jodie Douglas from Mad About Life Financial Services, General Manager of Coastal Advice Group, Mitch Ramsbotham, and bringing a perspective of a large corporate technology provider, Vicky Andrews is an enterprise Agile coach at Telstra. And rounding out our panel from Morningstar, Director of Financial Planning Products, Ivon Gower. Welcome, Phil Thompson.
Thanks, Fraser. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for being here. Now, we're talking all things around decision-making when it comes to technology in your business. And, of course, you've made a lot of those decisions in the last few years with your particular business and from moving from a full financial advice services to a specialist risk advice business. And along with all that came a whole lot of decision-making. So I thought you'd be a fantastic person to talk to in this episode.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Now, talk to us about the technology decisions that you've had to make in your business around the concept of how do you go about them?
Good question. It's pretty difficult. Technology, there's like a million different service offerings and a million different options. But I kind of think that like having a core technology or a core process within your business is really the business that we're in. Like if you think of any successful business, like their processes and their systems is really what makes that business valuable. And so that's the way I think about it is how do I have a great client experience, and how do I make sure my staff are efficient, and how do I make sure we're compliant? And then the technology just needs to help me do that.
Yeah, fantastic. And so obviously with the changes that you've made in your business, moving or leaning in towards the concept of you're just going to specialize in risk in your business at a time when obviously risk commissions were reducing, efficiencies were something that you really had to focus on. And you mentioned grabbing a core piece of technology and then building around it, or even the process. You sort of talked about the process being really important. Talk us through how you went through that in your own mind, then creating that process.
Yeah. So I guess the benefit of really specializing and dialing right into one area of advice is it just helped me really map out that client experience from very beginning to very end of what that looks like, because there's not like 20 different variables that we can help clients with. It's just one thing that we're going to help clients with, and we can just nail that process. So we know every time I have a client phone call, an initial client phone call, I know exactly what the steps will be, every step of the way. And, clients can leave that process at any point. They're the ones that, may not proceed or may not go ahead fully or may change their mind. But our end-to-end process could look very similar for every single client.
Yeah. Now you mentioned obviously starting with the client experience. Was this a tear up the sheets and start from scratch, or was this something that was a renovation? Talk to us about how you went about it.
Yeah, so I hadn't done much insurance only before. Like I'd never done any insurance only actually, because I thought that was if a client wanted insurance only, then they weren't a good client for my business. So it was kind of a tear everything up and kind of think about how we want to do insurance advice. And then from there we have like a rough map, and then just really building on that kind of rough idea of, well, we really want clients to, do they need insurance first of all? Do they want insurance? And then how do we provide a really simplified version of, not advice? And then, how do we give them like a proposal, if you will? And then, then it leads to advice, and then it leads to an application, then it leads to policy in place. So we kind of started with that rough map, which is pretty standard, pretty simple. And then just dialing into every little area of the business and going, okay, is this the way we want to do it? And we've changed our process. I mean, the actual steps in that process, we've changed a number of times and reinvented it. And even now I talk to my team and going, let's rip up our fact find and redo it because it's it's good, but it's not great. And how do we make that client experience better? How do we make it more compliant? And how do we make it easier for our team?
Yeah, now you're right. You can start from scratch at one point, and you can go with a fresh sheet of paper. But I guess at some point, that continual improvement part is also, or the renovation part is continual.
Yeah, I know, and I think that's kind of the most important thing. Actually, is just continually thinking about how do we make it better? How do we make it better? How do we make it better?
Yep. Now, when it comes to the selection, obviously there's always a selection. There's always alternatives and other products you can throw in when you're looking at that user experience. Are you focused on the client's experience more so than you are your own team or staff? As in, maybe one product's not quite as good internally, but it's amazing for the client, or vice versa.
Both. Probably, I would lean towards our business and making it more efficient for our business, because the bad thing about financial services is every client has a horrible experience with every financial planner. Like historically, we've got a really bad client experience process. No one walks away from a financial planner normally and says that was an amazing experience, because they've got to wait a number of weeks to get their SOA. They've got to, it takes time in all the research. So it's fortunate that we came at it thinking, okay, how do we communicate to our clients as efficiently as possible? Because that's really what builds that client experience, is making sure the clients understand where they're up to. Because it does take time. It does take us a number of weeks to, we've got to gather a whole bunch of data from the clients. We've got to go ahead and go away and do a whole bunch of research. So the client experience isn't like click a button and they've got an insurance policy, but it's how do we make ourselves more available to the clients and communicate more to the clients. So predominantly, how do we make our jobs easier to therefore communicate with clients easier and better?
And what sort of time do you take in researching all the options and I guess how long's a piece of string, but how much time did you spend on it?
Yeah, and this is kind of the thing we, think about reinventing as well, because we really dial into our pre-assessments. So we spend ages with our pre-assessments and going back and forward a lot. And that's one area that it's like, okay, how beneficial is that to the clients? Like, are we getting differing outcomes from our pre-assessments and spending that much time? So it probably takes us on average 4 to 6 weeks to prepare an SOA, because from fact find, because we may need to follow up additional information, and we're really dialing into that that pre-assessment work. But yeah, we're considering whether that's worthwhile. And but we did some numbers last month or two, and about 50% of our recommendation comes off the back of a pre-assessment. And instead of, if we just looked at a blind and picked an insurer based on what we felt, it was actually different when we really dialed into the pre-assessment.
So you think that pre-assessment really was a process that's created efficiencies in the overall area of your business, even though it takes longer at the beginning?
It probably hasn't created efficiencies, but it's gotten better client outcomes. And so that's the hard balance, is like it is much more inefficient for us, but we're getting better client outcomes. And so how valuable is that? Well, it is super valuable, but at what cost is the way I think about it.
Yep. Now, when you think about the process involved in choosing software, obviously there's a scenario where you have to invest a little bit of time and effort and money into before you even make a decision, and so that then you're pushing out down the track to hopefully that pays off down the track.
Yeah, I'm the type of person that researches. If I'm buying a $100 stereo, I'll research which stereo I want. So when it comes to software, it's like, you're throwing down a lot of time and energy and effort into just the research stage. So we took a long time researching, but it was just a matter of finding something that fit for today, and then and then building out a process around that, and whether it fits our business in 2-3 years' time, well, we can reassess that.
Yeah, that's an interesting way of looking at it. Obviously, the research can take time, but the fit for today, I think, is probably not a bad comment. It allows you to sort of not dive too deep into, or to be able to make a quick decision or a quicker decision.
Yeah, and as painful as it is moving your whole software to something else, I think that there is a concern where people want to build out a beast. Let's build out this beast because it'll do exactly what we want. And then if you're investing, that many hours into building out a beast, and then you realize, actually, we want our processes to change, and maybe this beast doesn't suit that need anymore. So that was my thinking, is let's just get something, let's just use it. And if it doesn't fit our business in 2 years' time, when we're changing stuff around, then let's look at moving again.
Fantastic. So you almost approach it like it's a 2-year decision.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, I'm not investing everything into any one software.
Yep, fantastic. Phil, thanks for coming on this episode. We look forward to catching you in the next one.
Thanks, mate.
Welcome, Jodie Douglas.
Hi, Fraser.
Thank you for coming on this episode, or this series, I should say. Now, tell us a little bit about your the principal advisor and responsible manager of your licensee, but your business is called Mad About Life. Tell us about that.
Yeah, that's right. Thank you for having me, Fraser. So Mad About Life Risk Advice is our business. We've been around nearly 8 years and just recently become self-licensed. So our licensee entity is Mad About Life Financial Group. We help everyday Australians with all things foundational financial advice, from their wealth, their protection to their legacy. And in our practice, we utilise Advisor Logic as our CRM and software.
Fantastic. Thank you for sharing that. Now, in this particular episode, we're talking about all things to do with making technology decisions. Now, obviously, that's a big part, and you have a fairly interesting and unique process within your business for making these decisions. Tell us about the team around you that helps make these decisions.
Yeah, sure. So I'm the principal advisor at Mad About Life, but there's no way that I could be able to give advice in a digital world without my partner in crime, which is Mike. His background is in IT. So over 20 years of IT support and test analyst work. So when it comes to making decisions around technology in our business, I'm the driver of what we need. I'm always the one to go to Mike and say, I'd like to make this process more efficient for our clients and for myself as the advisor. And then Mike puts his IT hat on and says, yep, we can do that, or no, we can't, and why, and comes up with the solution effectively.
Fantastic. So are you the emotional driver and he's the logical driver? Is that how you see it?
Definitely. 100% emotional. This is what we need. Tell me how we can do it. And then he brings me back down to earth and says, hang on a minute, let's just see what you actually need.
Yeah. Now, it's funny, isn't it? This is what we need. We need it now. We needed it yesterday. I want this thing. I really, really want it. And he's like, let me just let me just bring you back to reality.
Definitely. I'm incredibly impatient when it comes to taking on new things. And in the world of IT, impatience, there is a need for it, but you do need to slow things down to make sure that there's actually a requirement as well.
Yeah. Talk to me about the requirements. So obviously that's something that that Mike's very familiar with, setting out requirements. How does he talk to you about that process to say to you, what is the requirements? What do we need this functionality to do?
Yeah, that's it. So it comes down to what's the problem that we're trying to solve. So when I go to Mike and I say, okay, I really want to be able to do this and this is why, that's where he'll actually ask me a whole bunch of questions to actually form what we call like a test case, really. And that's an IT term, is to actually look at, well, what are the requirements of the user? The requirements of the user being the client and the advisor if it's to meet both of those needs. And then making sure that we've got a clear list of those requirements and then ticking off the solution to meet those requirements, not just putting in place the solution and then hoping that it meets those requirements, actually looking at the requirements first and then building the solution from there. And quite often it can be a completely different solution to what I was thinking once he actually breaks that down.
Yeah, okay, very good. And so does that then often require him building something, or does it require you guys going to market and saying, right, who are the product providers that can provide the solution?
Yeah, sometimes it's to build something. So we utilize Microsoft Suite, which has a whole bunch of like checklists and things like that you can actually build within it, things that I never knew even existed. So sometimes you don't even have to recreate the wheel. There's already software there that can provide that. And quite often it's a case of just having a look at, well, what are the tools that are out there that meet this? So quite often we don't need to build it ourselves. There's already something there. But Mike's role is really to have a look at, okay, what's our requirements, what's out there, and then what's the best tool for the problem.
Yeah, and I guess that means you have to take into account all of your existing tools, and That's also part of his job, I'm taking it?
Yeah, definitely. And this is the thing, is if you have too many systems or apps, it can actually be too onerous to manage. So all the time Mike is saying to me, hang on a sec, do we have a tool that can already do this? Let's not add another one. So in our practice, we have about 10 digital apps and softwares that we use. And I mean, that's already quite a lot to be all over. So we don't really want to end up with 20 of them. Yeah,
that's a really good point. So I'll talk to you about those when we get to sort of towards the third episode, when we talk about the different technology and how they stack together. But how do you then prioritize? Obviously, if you want to do a lot of things, sometimes it's incremental change, but sometimes you want to do a whole lot of things at once. How do you prioritize what you do first?
Mm-hmm. So we actually use Planner. Microsoft Planner is our favorite tool. I use it to manage our clients in their workflow, but we also use it for our 90-day plan. So that's all things that we want to do within our business. We add it to Planner, and across the team we do it. So even the admin team add to Planner things that are kind of little pain points that we want to improve on. And then together we actually prioritize those things. And before we know it, we've got a 30, 60 or a 90-day plan. Sometimes they push out beyond the 90 days, but we measure that within our Planner tool. And it's quite fun. Every month we actually go through our Planner in our team meeting, and we actually move those little widgets across or complete them once we've implemented them. And we vote as a team as well as to what's important. And we move along in that process of testing those requirements and so forth. And sometimes we scrap them and we say, hey, that was a great idea 90 days ago, but actually we've found we don't really need it.
Well, that's a really good process. So every month you get together as a team and reassess that 90-day plan. And obviously, like every good plan, it shifts and moves fluently as things change.
It does, that's right. And it's really great. Microsoft Planner actually has the ability to delegate within it as well. So not only do we put the little widgets up and then allocate them 30, 60 and 90 days, we then allocate them to each team member so that everyone's working on something to improve the business.
Wow, that's really cool. That's really cool. And so your business then, I take it, is a constant renovation.
It is always moving, always adaptable. Quite often we're already ahead of the curve and we've already created that within our business, because you're always putting those ideas down and always moving forward.
And always striving for efficiency.
Definitely. Yeah.
And tell me about the price tag that goes along with striving for efficiency, because obviously, having a mic in your business costs money, and constantly working on stuff costs money, and I guess it takes time to pay itself back.
It does, definitely. I mean, we're really lucky because we are a husband and wife team. I have the advisor skill set. Mike has the IT skill set. I can only imagine how much it would cost if we had to outsource that IT resource. We take advantage of it, really. I mean, all the time we're just saying to Mike, can we do this? Can we do this daily? Whereas I know a lot of advice practices out there would have to bring in an IT resource for that. So for us, the cost is obviously Mike works within the business, but he also works a lot for love because it is our business. So, there is that cost. And really, apart from that, having that IT resource is probably our biggest cost. In terms of other softwares and things like that, you can have a lot of apps and things like that are quite low cost to keep the cost down. However, nowadays, I think the largest cost within our business is probably very much so the software, followed by wages would be the two.
Yep, fantastic. Jodie, thank you so much for coming on this particular episode. We look forward to catching you in the next episode when we talk about the expectations of software versus the reality.
Thanks, Fraser.
Thanks for joining us, Mitch.
Thank you, Fraser. Thanks for having me.
Now, you're very welcome. Now, just for a quick context point of view, do you want to give us a quick overview of the business that you're working in at the moment?
Yeah, sure. So I recently joined the Coastal Advice Group only 6 months ago, really. The business is going through a fairly significant evolution at the moment. Started a few years ago now, and as every business does, started as a small business with a CEO, Daniel, with real visions for the future and where he wants to take it. So previously based solely in Newcastle and on the central coast of New South Wales. The vision now is to really expand and move up the East Coast with a couple of brands excitingly about to be launched further up the coast. At this particular point in time, we find ourselves with 12 advisors at present, with a couple more to come on soon. The business model and the structure that we run is we offshore a couple of functions of our business, being both the paraplanning and some of the more paper-based and onerous administrative functions, I suppose you'd say, to a couple of different third-party companies. So that just gives a little bit of context and colour as to the setup and structure of the business, and probably a lead into the conversation and the way that it will flow, and where I suppose my viewpoint comes from.
Yeah, fantastic. Thanks, Mitch. For that's a good point. You guys are a business that started up small. You've grown fairly rapidly with a lot of growth plans. As you said, 12 advisors currently. Yeah,
12 currently, but a couple on the boil at the moment, and some pretty significant growth aspirations. Once Gladys lets us out of our LGA, we'll be trying to head up the East Coast, and there's a couple of spots that we have some brands up and running now, but the logistics of that have just had to wait.
Fair enough. Now, obviously, plenty of we're focusing today on the decision making process and especially around technology. But I guess there's a lot of decisions being made in your business fairly rapidly. Talk to us about that decision making process. How do you go about making decisions? What are the things that sort of come front of mind, and how do you do them?
So the decision making process here is a bit of an interesting one. From an emotional point of view, I suppose people tend to hold on to the past. And I know that that's probably a generalisation, but I'm sure that there's probably listeners that can attest to the same, whether it's themselves or their staff. The past and what you ultimately know and what you're comfortable with is always going to be a big piece of the puzzle for the whole team and everybody that needs to be considered in the process, right? So what we do, and this is no way meant to be a slight to anybody either in our business or any businesses out there, but it's just a really pertinent point, is that we really work to engage from the lowest common denominator up. Ultimately, the journey in that you go and what you're going through, we find it really important to ensure that you support everybody through the change, and that along with yourselves, they truly believe that the way that you're heading is beneficial, not that it's difficult. There may be some hurdles along the way, but they have to see those in that particular position where they're going to see that there's that polarization between where they are now and where they need to be. They need to see and understand the journey and the engagement of all of the stakeholders involved, so that then you have all of the aspects that you require in that information gathering and I suppose the decision-making process around whether you're going to do it, to make sure that you can take them on the journey and what the requirements are going to be to get there. There's another side of that too, which is not just the emotional, but the logical side of it.
Yeah, it's very interesting. And I like what you said there when starting with the concept of the past and understanding that there is a history, there is a past, and it's an important part of the decision-making process, especially if you want people to engage in it, engage and accept those decisions that are made. And you sort of also mentioned or touched on the idea there, around sometimes people can sort of get into the smaller, well, I was thinking at the time that the smaller decisions versus, is this a small decision or a big decision?
Normally they're fairly large because of the type of business that we're currently in. So the evolution of the business means that going from a small business to a larger one, there's more parts to there's more pieces to the puzzle that need to be considered. But normally, what we're talking about here and what I alluded to was then the logical side. So if you account for the people that you've got in that particular, if you account for the emotional side and you account for the people and what the requirements are going to be, and you ensure that you communicate it correctly, if you've then done the logical side correctly, which is usually there's fairly significant empirical evidence and analysis that goes into the process of determining whether the solution is a fit for the business in the first place. And we're going through that evolution where we've gone from a small business to a business that I would like to think that in the grand scheme of things and proportionally, we're getting to a bit of a scale. So we've moved away, and we are moving away quite rapidly from the structure within a business where you've got what I would deem to be the generalist model, and you've got one or two people, one or two man band with people doing a lot of different things but not specialising anything. We're in a position now where we've got people starting to specialise in their roles, and really drilling into doing exactly what their proficiencies are, I suppose. And that also then gives us the ability to measure the efficiency of those roles and potentially some of the deficiencies that may be there, and look for ways to improve what we're doing. And in a lot of circumstances, it tends to be a new technology or a renovation of some of the existing that we've got that will provide that solution, I suppose. The decision-making process is fairly firmly grounded in increasing people's ability in their current roles. So a lot of what we're doing now in our journey is certainly by no means about replacing people or not hiring people. It's more about the transition that we're going through and moving away from that generalist structure and complementing the really skilled people that we have to assist them to do the roles that they're basically attuned to doing, without having to get into the other bits and pieces that they don't need to be spending their time on.
Yeah, fair enough. So this comes from a motivational point of view. If you want to take the people that are doing these jobs now and then just make those jobs more efficient in that structure, rather than saying, rather than it being a problem, just saying we can actually get a better outcome here. Yeah,
totally. And in a business like ours that's growing, it's really hard it's very easy to upscale technology because their capacity is almost limitless. So if you've got one individual that has control over that, and a software suite around them that has basically limitless capacity to take on extra burden and extra workload, the individual can orchestrate that and play conductor and the technology you can always capacity manage the technology a lot easier. So yeah, it's certainly not about getting rid of the people, because the people play a pivotal role in that. It's really about complementing them and making sure that what they're doing can really be scaled up alongside the business.
Yep. And with the size of your business now, I guess it's easier if you've got one person in the business just looking at the technology and saying, right, let's have a look, let's review it, let's go through the pros and cons, and make some calls around, okay, this sounds like it's going to, or looks like it could work, and then we can go make decisions. Is that how you're working?
It probably makes sense, but we're not quite there yet. A lot of our decision-making process is actually born from the collegiate way that our business functions. We have really regular forums within the business wherein which everybody is empowered to really bring to the table any issues that they may be having, or any of the problems they may be coming up against as far as capacity is concerned, and we will absolutely hear them out, because throughout this transition and the things that we're doing, the consistent feedback from the team is so important, because a lot of people have the potential just to suffer in silence and melt away in the corner, and you don't know until you see it. But if we run it in that really collegiate way and provide them a platform to have the discussion and suggest solutions, then we actually find that the people that specialize in those particular areas, they expose themselves to solutions that probably I don't. Somebody that's in our marketing team, I don't necessarily, even organically with some of the algorithms and stuff that are used within social platforms and those sorts of things, I'm not exposed to that because it doesn't flash up in front of me, where a lot of the solutions are going to be brought to the table by some of the people that are producing the work day in and day out, because within their little ecosystem, that's the stuff that's put in front of them. So we really try to create a platform where those solutions can be brought to the table by people, and we will literally then just start the project and synthesizing the information and the rationale behind it from it could be the receptionist through to the head of the marketing department. It doesn't matter.
Yep. Now, talk to me about the project, because obviously bringing the idea to light is one thing, but what about the actual process around how do you then break that down into a project and say, right, we're going to do this, we're going to use it for this long, we're going to do a trial, or what and then we I guess we need to work out whether we're going to make a decision to or not to proceed with the product.
Well, a lot of this tends to be in response to either overwhelming feedback from the team, to find a support mechanism that ultimately allows them to be more efficient, or in light of a lot of the changing way that our industry's working, it's a response to some of the legislative instruments that are put in front of us and that we're currently having to react to. Yep. So the decision-making process, in a lot of circumstances, is sort of thrust upon us. But like I touched on, the process that we undertake from a structural point of view is more towards the aspirational goals and what we want to be doing and where we want to be taking the business. So we tend to be looking in our circumstances towards the best client experience and outcome that we possibly can, and how we can support that internally. So all of the decision making process is fairly heavily wrapped around our business values. So there's an overlay of the client, the putting the client at the fore of everything that we do, and making sure that all of the decisions that we're making are going to have that specific effect. We're guided on this journey in a lot of circumstances by historically some of the gateposts and tipping points that we've seen, and we have a business coach that we utilise external to our business. So most often it will be proposed, costed out, the standard sort of business case around the problem put in front of the leadership team and our CEO, run past the business coach, because the business coach has just that much breadth of knowledge that there may be, and we don't attest to have all of the answers. Run past the business coach as to what they have done previously and whether they see this as a logical step and a logical way forward. And then once we've agreed in principle that it's probably a good way forward, we would then likely engage the partner on the journey to come along and offer them our problem statement and where we're looking to take it, and try to cut through the sales part of it and just get down to, we've had a look at it, we've researched it, we're comfortable, but we're only we're only scratching the surface. Now talk us through the semantics and the logistics of how this will actually happen in principle, based on the way that our business runs, and getting them to know the structures, rhythms, routines, and cadence within which we work over here, and making sure that it's going to be a fit.
Yeah, fantastic. Thanks for and we'll probably get into that sort of that sales, like you said, getting through that in the next episode with regards to expectations versus reality in the sales process. But look, it's really good to know that, and I think it's a great idea that you take these decisions back through your business coach, who's going to ask some interesting and confronting questions to make sure that that is the right decision you've made. Mitch, thanks so much for being part of this episode. We look forward to catching you in the next one.
Awesome. Thanks, mate.
Thanks for joining us, Vicky.
Thank you for having me, Fraser.
Fantastic. Now, do you want to give the listeners a quick overview of your role at the moment?
Yep, sure. Currently, I'm working with Telstra, and I entered the business in a learning and development role, but very quickly transitioned to our Agile transition and transformation. So I'm sitting as an enterprise Agile coach, working across a few of the functions, and currently in strategy and finance.
Thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate your efforts. Now, in this episode, we're talking around technology decisions, and obviously, I'm sure you make a fair few of those decisions in your role. And I thought we might start with a process that you and I have discussed before, actually, around how do you make technology decisions and whether you do or don't proceed with something.
Yeah, so currently working in Telstra in our Agile model, we implement a bit of a mindset shift first, and then some of the skill sets and processes. So the technology decision definitely starts for us with a mindset of being open to more of a human-centered design process. So I'm not sure whether you know what that is.
Tell us about the human-centered design. We know about the user experience.
Yeah. We just want to keep the human at the center of it all. So previously, I'm sure many people would say Telstra may have been a bit more of a government-type centric organisation who built a lot of amazing things, but maybe not exactly what the customer was after. So the process now is around keeping that customer-centric model, whilst we iterate and deliver small incremental pieces of a product, and keep taking feedback and improving on that, so that hopefully the end product is actually what the customer wants.
Yeah, so gone are the days where you build a massive infrastructure and then try and convince people that they need it.
Correct. And it's very hard sometimes with some of the really expensive projects, and it's almost finished, to actually call out and say, actually, we need to stop, because no matter how far down that path we go, nobody actually wants it.
Yeah, it can be a pretty expensive decision if it's made in the wrong way. Obviously, you're used to making decisions for a large business and large organisation. Always trying to relate this back to it's very similar, I guess, process for small business, and especially when it comes to small businesses making decisions around technology. You've mentioned Agile, and we should probably open that can of worms up and sort of talk about that decision-making process around Agile and how that works and how a small business can implement.
Sure. So Agile is both a way of thinking, and it is a fairly logical system and process that we use. So many tools involved in it, but if you're thinking about it, I guess, from a small business sense, it's about breaking things down into what we call sprints. So when I say sprint, everyone often thinks of fast, and it's going to be a fast deliverable. It's actually not. The word sprint resonated from a distance back in the day in the Olympics. So it's the 100-meter sprint. So sprint is really breaking things into manageable time chunks. Sure, we'd love to deliver fast. That's a bonus. But in Agile, it's all about these incremental sprints and pausing for that moment to have a retrospective on what we've actually achieved together and what we've actually about to deliver.
Yeah, nice. So when you're talking about the sprints, you obviously have a start line and a finish line, as with any small project. And I guess when small businesses are thinking about decision making around technology, it's around saying, okay, great. If we do this small thing, get to the end and then reevaluate. Is that probably the best way of looking at it?
Yeah, sort of. So we try to break it up first with a bit of prioritization. So the simplest form of that with some of the smaller teams in Telstra even is this Moscow approach. So the must have, should have, could have, and we like to say won't have for now. So Moscow is a pretty easy little acronym for us. and we put those must-haves into the sprint. And then if we manage to get those achieved, we can then always add in an item that's a should-have or a would-have. So that's the simplest form. The more complex ones, we move into a DVF formula, which is quite mathematical.
Talk us through that.
DVF. So that's our little mathematical formula for desirability plus viability divided by feasibility. And we really want to look at all three of those categories in isolation. So there's no point in saying that something like 7G, hypothetically, is a desirable thing for our customers if the viability of that is just going to cost too much and no one's going to buy it. So you've got to really look at them siloed. And then finally, the feasibility, if we don't have the technicians or the ability to build it, there's absolutely no point in attempting something that's desirable and viable to our customers. So the formula works quite neatly. And we don't use a 1 to 10 scale, we use a Fibonacci numbering sequence, which allows for more of a distribution of the eventual number that we land on.
Okay, so let's dive into this a little bit deeper because so we're using the Fibonacci sequence, which is obviously the numbers where you take the previous two numbers and you add them together and it makes the next number. A bit like the way was it a snail shell it grows? Is that
correct?
Is it?
Correct. And that's what it looks like.
And so then if you take the concept of DVF, desirability, how do you then prioritize or using the Fibonacci numbers to come up with a desirable number? Yeah,
so we try to start somewhere where we think is probably mid-ground. You just have to do a relative estimation and say, look, we think this one's our middle, we'll give it a go. We try to use blind voting tools. So we're all used to the loudest person in the room influencing, or just someone who's got a great story to tell makes everyone else vote their way. So we use some digital tools like Planet Poker or some simple tools like 123, raise your card, so that you have to vote on your own. And then we add those all up and we come up with a mean number for those. So the highest number in the D score is the most desirable. So.
Excellent. So that becomes, how badly do we want this thing?
Yeah. How much does it solve your pain point?
Okay. So that's the desirability piece. Talk to us about the viability piece.
Yeah, so quite often internally we may look at viability as a revenue stream, or it could be avoidance of risk. So it's quite viable if we do this because it will avoid a big penalty. So those are a couple of clear examples for ourselves. When a customer is looking at it, they're probably weighing up about, I'd love it, but would I really use it? Like, how viable is it that I would actually buy this? We've all got plenty of things in the cupboard that we love that we didn't really need or use. So pretty important to combine the two and you add the D and the V together.
Excellent. So we've got two Fibonacci numbers for the desirability and the viability. And then what are we doing?
We want to see if it's feasible for us to get it done. So the lower the number means the less complexity, uncertainty, and effort required. So if we think it's pretty simple, not a lot of effort for us, and we could really nail it, we'll give it a 1. If we think any of those are a bit on the high side, up that goes on the scale.
Okay, fantastic. So the feasibility scale is the opposite.
Correct.
Of the D and the V. So we have to, a 1 is the best case scenario. It's very easy to do. And the harder it becomes, the higher the number.
Correct. And more complex it is. Yeah. And it divides by the F score. So that's why.
Excellent. So the D plus the V divided by the F gives you a number. Mm-hmm. And then we can look at that versus other software or other processes or systems or way we're spending our money and work out for our prioritization.
And with the total score, we like to buy or work on the highest number first.
Fantastic. So there you go. That's a great little system and how you're making decisions from a large business point of view, but certainly something that small business can also look at implementing or putting in place when it comes to prioritizing what they're going to do.
Correct. And I think the biggest part of it is that blind voting and being able to recast the vote. So as a coach, I'll quite often look at the back end scores and I may call out, I can see someone there has scored that, a lot lower than everyone else. Is there something you'd love to share that we may not all know about? So it could be that there's an amazing engineer in the room who actually knows it's not that feasible and the rest of us think it is. And by them sharing and feeling psychologically safe to share why they scored differently, then we might all recast the votes with that new piece of information.
Excellent. So that sort of goes back to the blind voting is good, but the blind voting can also be skewed.
It can, definitely can. Yeah.
Fantastic, Vicky. Thank you so much for coming on and chatting us today about how you make tech decisions. And from a large business point of view, I look forward to chatting with you in the next episode.
Fantastic. Thanks for having me.
Welcome, Ivon Gower, to this, our first episode in this series.
Thanks, Fraser. It's great to be here.
Fantastic to have you here. Now, tell us a little bit about, just give us a quick overview of you and what you're doing in your position at the moment.
Sure. Well, I've worked in the financial planning industry for over 20 years, across a number of companies, varying sizes, and often moving from the kind of operational roles, paraplanning type functions, through to technology roles. And when I look at the way I work, I get frustrated personally by doing the same thing over and over again. So whenever I've worked in these operational roles, I've had this natural desire to jump into a technology solution and try and find a way to solve that problem, to make it more efficient. I'm the kind of person who'll happily spend a day trying to shortcut a 5-minute task so I never have to do it again. And over the years, I've had the opportunity to work with and learn from some amazing people across the industry, people who've really sort of shaped the industry, people who continue to shape it today. And over that time, it's kind of brought me to my current role. I've recently started at Morningstar as the Director of Financial Planning Products. You know, it's a great title, but essentially what I do day to day is work with the Advisor Logic community to develop and implement on our product strategy.
Yeah, fantastic. And as you mentioned, many years of technology decisions. And of course, this episode, we're really honing in on the idea of how people make technology decisions and all of the different things that go through their head at the time. And so certainly very qualified to talk to us about that particular subject.
I hope so.
Tell us about yourself. You're obviously making a lot of decisions, and as you mentioned, in your time of both working from a back office point of view and an efficiency point of view, how do you go about decision making?
It's a deep question, right? And an interesting one. I think if I look back and I was to say to my 16-year-old self, one day you're going to be telling people how you make decisions. I'd venture to say I probably would have choked on my Bacardi Breezer at the time. It's what I'd say is, right, I've bared witness to how a lot of different businesses make decisions, and I've seen it work really well, right? Where a lot of science has gone into it is in the big end of town, where these big organizations have a lot of money, have a lot of resources to support the decision-making process. And I think we can leverage that from a smaller business and an individual perspective. So I'll talk you through the process for the big corporations. They will often start by drawing up this list of needs. They do some work into understanding what they want out of a technology system, and then they'll go through an RFI, or a request for information process. That's really them sort of casting a broad net and saying, hey everyone, this is what we want. Can you respond as to how you could do that? From that, they'll get a smaller pool, a short list, and they'll go through the request for proposal, which is the RFP process. And that gets really detailed in terms of, tell us, vendor, how would you work with us? You know what we need. What can you do? You get into pricing, you get into the long-term vision of the product. You look at gaps and, would you be prepared to sort of fill these gaps for us? And then they often go into a proof of concept, which is where they'll have a set time, and they'll say, we want to really use this and experience what it's like to use. Then they make a decision, and then it's planning and implementation. And that process sometimes takes years to fulfill. They have specialist people, procurement, project people working on it. Now, in a smaller business, you don't have the luxury of those resources. You don't have the luxury of that time often, but you can still leverage the process. So as a starting point, what do you need? What's important for your business to get out of technology? What are your fundamental processes that you're trying to achieve? And then have a look around, right? The best process, I believe, is to constantly be looking at businesses. So, don't be afraid to call up and say, I'd like a demo of your software. I'm probably not interested in buying at the moment, but I'm interested in seeing what's around in the marketplace. That means that when you do reach a point where you're making a decision, you're kind of on the front foot. You've got your short list already, and then you can go into more detailed discussions with maybe a couple of vendors, including your existing provider, if that's relevant.
Yeah, it is really an interesting process, isn't it? And I love the way that you've got to have the actual decision-making, the actual make a decision time in there. And often when you go through those RFI, RFPs, those dates are already set out. So it's part of the process as well. It sort of brings deadlines and decisions to things. And also I like the concept of, having a look around often because, that list of needs sometimes is hard to define exactly what you want.
It definitely is. And I feel that kind of grounds your decision, right? It helps you over time to understand whether it's been a successful decision or not. It really helps you not to get too far away from yourself and to focus on what is going to be successful for your business. Understanding that piece, when you look at the trial process, the POC for a big business, the trial for a small business, means that gives you the opportunity to then really hammer those things that you need to do. And that I feel is critical. It's something that's often missed in smaller businesses who explore rather than really try and use during a demo. And it makes it a much smoother transition if you decide to go ahead.
Yeah. Do you think people get a little bit caught up on this list of needs with must-have versus want-to-haves? As in quite often we think, oh, that'd be really good to have that, so I'm going to throw that in there. But really, that whole challenging process of going back to your list before you go out and say, why do I really need this? Is this is this the ultimate process, or is this something that I don't necessarily need but want?
Your must-haves are your must-haves, right? I think you need to focus on those. The nice-to-haves, they're a bonus. They are nice to have. But I think when you're looking at nice to haves, that's the opportunity to also be open to see what your software partner is bringing to the table. What do they have now that you might want to utilize in the future? And where are they going, right? Where do you think your practice is going versus where is the vendor going? Where is the software partner going? Because that, I think, helps you to align your goals with theirs. And if you can get on the same page, then that's a journey you can both go through together. Whereas if you start that relationship and you're going in one direction and they're going in another, then it's probably going to be a challenging one to make successful.
Yeah, when I think of that direction conversation is an interesting one too. The idea of wanting stuff is great, but often it's the frustration out of dislike or not wanting something that often drives that direction.
It can be quite emotional, right? It's and I think that's why when you look at that sort of process of scanning the marketplace and understanding what else is out there, it helps to put things into perspective, because in any business, with any technology, you will experience good days and bad days, and being able to put that into perspective is really important to navigate the troughs, because it will help you just focus on the longer term and appreciate that a day or so of inefficiency that's then resolved can really help to shape the business.
Yep. Now, talk us through some of the advantages and disadvantages of the idea of slowly, incrementally changing stuff over time versus throwing everything out and starting fresh.
The old knockdown or rebuild, knockdown and rebuild or renovate, right? I think that comes into this view of we need to make change. So we're not satisfied with the status quo. How do we move forward? And sometimes when you just knock it down, you are forced to rebuild. And so that can be a useful process to go through. It's not to suggest that you can't just sit back and reevaluate, but it depends where that motivation sits within the practice. So can you sort of, corral the team around a project where you say, we're sticking with this technology, but we're going back to basics on our objectives. We're going to start to look at what we can do with an open mind again, versus we're going somewhere else and we're really going to rethink it and we're going to go for it. And there's no right or wrong answer there. I think it depends on the business and it depends on their approach to the tech. Yeah,
absolutely. And as you mentioned, the team's approach to the tech and the team's adjustment to the tech. Talk to us about the idea of prioritizing. How do you, obviously you've been in plenty of businesses where you've built a lot of software. There's a whole series of prioritization that goes on constantly, this one over that one. And I guess the idea of pipelines are only so big. You can have anything you want, but you can't have everything. How do you go about prioritising within, say, your own businesses that, say, advisors can learn from?
So we build a roadmap, and the roadmap is based on a vision. And having a vision is kind of like your North Star. This is where you feel the industry's going and how you're going to support the industry to get there. When you can start to map out, in order to get there in, say, 5 years' time, we need to go through this process, and here's what we can release from time to time that will add value to users but get us further along that journey. When you have that guiding principle, it helps everyone then to evaluate their own needs against that direction. And it's not to say that people will raise ideas or concerns and you'll say, nope, we can't do that because we've got to run over there. You know, the roadmap is always organic and there's always capacity to fit extra things in. But it will help people to understand that, you know, when I'm asking for this, I'm also asking for that to be deferred. And if I really buy into this long-term view, I want to get there as soon as possible. I want to contribute to it. I have feedback, and the feedback that I'm providing in relation to this vision is something that's really going to be realised.
Yeah, I feel like everybody wants everything now, and we'll probably get into this in the next conversation when we start talking about expectations versus reality. But often the reality actually is around the like, as you said, for something to be started, something else has to be stopped.
Exactly right, and it's a tough decision to have. The optimal approach is just to be clear on what people might miss out on if that we reprioritize, and then to have that conversation and see what the outcome is.
Yep, fantastic. Thanks, Ivon. Thanks for coming on this episode. Some good stuff there around the learning from a larger business, from the RFI process all the way through to the decision making. Thanks very much. We'll see you in the next episode where we talk about expectations versus reality.
Thanks, Fraser.